2000s comedies aren't just timeless classics, they're some of the best movies ever made. They played host to some of the funniest writers, directors, and actors we've ever had. But what about them makes them just as relevant today as they were back then? If you're a fan of comedy movies, chances are some of your all-time favorites came from this era. Whether it's The Hangover, Superbad, or Wedding Crashers, these movies are still dominating the discussion today. So what made the 2000s the golden age for comedy movies? It wasn't just the hilarious writers, directors, and actors. I mean, don't get me wrong, those were huge, but there's even more to it. And reason number 5 on this list is the difference between a disposable movie and one that can stand the test of time. Kicking it off with number 1, and no surprise, these were written and directed by some of the greatest comedy minds of all time. I mean, we had Todd Phillips, Judd Apatow, Scott Armstrong. These were some of the great minds behind movies like The Hangover, Old School, Bad Santa, Wedding Crashers, The 40-Year-Old Virgin, the list goes on. The funniest people at this time were the ones that were making the movies. It really can't be stressed enough the extent to which a funny writer and director can really influence the trajectory of a film. And I really feel like that's what's missing in a lot of comedy movies nowadays, is that the funniest writers and directors aren't being prioritized, and really they are a huge part of the package. But a strong director and writing team alone isn't enough. And that gets to number 2 on this list, in that a lot of these movies were passion projects. They weren't movies being made solely just to make a profit, that were being made out of passion. Superbad, Knocked Up, and Pineapple Express, The 40-Year-Old Virgin, like all of these movies were someone's passion project, and you really feel it on screen. These were all original ideas. They didn't rely on existing IP like you see with the current run of movies that we've seen in the box office for the last decade or so. These were original, never seen before stories. And another thing to add, in these passion projects, they were a highly collaborative environment. And the people that were writing and directing these movies had a heavy hand in his projects. A lot of the greatest comedy minds of all time were getting together, and maybe they aren't the people that are billed on the front of the poster or you see at the beginning of the credits, but these teams worked together to make these movies what they were. And you know, Judd Apatow talks about this a lot in his masterclass and some interviews he's done, that the movies that he made and that were made in that era would be nowhere near as good as they were if it wasn't for this collaborative process. I mean, he really stresses the importance of getting notes on your script and inviting friends and funny colleagues to your table reads to really hash this out and make sure that we got the best product possible. And we really have this collaboration to thank for bringing us some of the greatest comedy movies of all time. But what's the most important thing to actually getting the laughs? And that takes us to number 3, in that these movies played host to some of the greatest comedic actors of all time. I mean, you have Vince Vaughn, Paul Rudd, Seann William Scott, Owen Wilson, and the list goes on. So we already established that these movies were being written and directed by some of the funniest minds of all time, but really that can only do so much. I mean, you really need strong comedic leads, and so many of these movies didn't just have one, they had 2, 3, 4. We've talked about Judd Apatow, so think about The 40-Year-Old Virgin, his directorial debut. I mean, it starred Steve Carell, but then in supporting roles, we had Paul Rudd, Elizabeth Banks, Leslie Mann. I mean, these casts really brought this movie to life. And this is true of so many other comedies in this era. I mean, there's a reason why the Frat Pack got their name, the Frat Pack, and why they were so famous for getting together and making these movies what they were. I mean, look at Anchorman, for example. I mean, starring Will Ferrell, but then you have Paul Rudd, Vince Vaughn, Steve Carell, Luke Wilson, Ben Stiller, and so on and so forth. It's funny to think about, like, what would Anchorman be if it was just starring Will Ferrell and they didn't have the cast they had? There's no way that movie would be as funny as it is. My favorite movie of all time, Wedding Crashers. This is really Vince Vaughn's MO, and it's co-starring Owen Wilson. They are just so amazing on screen. Like, there's never a dull moment in the movie. It's not like they run into characters who aren't matching them and aren't bringing the comedic chops. In addition to them, I mean, we had Bradley Cooper, Jane Seymour, Isla Fisher, Christopher Walken, and so on and so forth. You're really getting to this level where it's like everyone is matching everyone, everyone's playing off of each other, and it's just like every moment is topping the last moment in the movie because everyone is just so funny and they're creating such a hilarious dynamic on screen. Thinking about your list of favorite comedy movies, you know, I would challenge you to think about ones where maybe you really loved the comedic lead, but the rest of the cast maybe didn't reach the same level, and really compare those movies that you can think of to your favorite comedy movies of all time. And I think you'll definitely see a trend where the best comedy movies of all time definitely have several super strong comedic actors. A lot of comedic actors aren't taken as seriously as they should be by critics, the press, the public, and whatnot. I think a lot of people would laugh if you said that you thought that Ben Stiller or Paul Rudd or Vince Vaughn or Leslie Mann or Reese Witherspoon, if you said you thought that they were some of the most talented actors of all time, they would say, no, are you crazy? Of course it's Leonardo DiCaprio, Anne Hathaway, Mary Tyler Moore. But I don't think people realize just how hard it is to be a strong comedic actor and to really get those laughs. It's a lot harder to get people to laugh uncontrollably than it is to get them to think or to feel something dramatically. And getting into reason number 4, these movies tackled universal themes, thoughts, and emotions. A lot of these movies are a subgenre of comedy that I like to call the everyday life comedy, something that's grounded in reality. Similar things have happened to you in real life, and you know these characters, you know these situations, and it really feels like you're just a fly on the wall observing real people. And that really is what makes a lot of these movies so special. It's like, oh, I know that person in real life. Oh, my birthday was like that. Oh, I've been to a funeral like that. You know, think of movies like Old School, Mean Girls, The Hangover, The 40-Year-Old Virgin, like all of those movies. I'm sure you can connect with most, if not all of the characters. You can connect with most, if not all of the situations. All of the people feel like real people. All of the situations feel very real. Nothing feels watered down. It's not like we're watching some artificially fabricated scene. You know, it takes us just to familiar places with familiar people. And that's a lot of what we've been missing from movies nowadays, comedies especially. But getting into number 5, what I teased in the beginning, what separates these movies from just being disposable to being movies that withstand the test of time? And this isn't the first thing that probably came to your mind, but these movies had a shocking amount of heart. You know, take Superbad, for example. One of the funniest movies of all time. But it also tackles a very serious concept of, what will it be like spending college away from my childhood best friend? What does our friendship really mean? What does the future of our friendship look like? You know, movies like The 40-Year-Old Virgin and Wedding Crashers at a surface level may just seem like good, silly, raunchy fun, but those two tackle very serious themes in growing up and finding true love for the first time. You know, everyone laughs at the characters that Seann William Scott and Paul Rudd played in role models, but at its core, it tackles the serious theme of taking ownership of your actions and learning to take responsibility. I mean, I know I just mentioned it, but Wedding Crashers really hit me hard. I can think of so many rom-coms where I'm just laughing my ass off and this is so much fun, but it's like, am I gonna watch this again? Probably not. If I do, maybe it'll be in like 10 years or whatever, you know, because it's just funny, but it doesn't really mean anything. But I know damn well, by the end of Wedding Crashers, I was rooting so hard for Owen Wilson and Rachel McAdams' relationship to work out, and when it finally does, it's just such an amazing payoff. You know, you just watch this whole journey and you are just so invested. And I remember the first time I watched this, I remember the next day, 2 days later, I was still thinking about this movie. And now that you know what makes the 2000s comedies some of the greatest movies of all time, you might be surprised to hear that if it weren't for American Pie, you likely would have never heard of any of these movies. And I take a deep dive into why this is here.